and welcome to another episode of Back to the Burgh, presented by the PodHub Network. I'm joined today by the second half of 412 Sports Talk. From Steel Valley, please welcome Mad Chad Nolan. Mad Chad, what up?
What's going on, man? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Hey, we tried to make it work with both of you on one episode. Obviously, other things were happening, but that's this industry. Things get in the way all the time.
Oh no! like that.
Exactly.
Right, knock the camera over.
I was just recently going through. Actually, it's a funny story. I was going through like my old podcasts for like a best of or whatever, and there's an episode where one of my lights like falls on top of me while I'm like listening to this guy. He won. He was on University of Ohio, and they won the Idaho Potato Bowl. He's showing me the ring. And like I'm like, oh, this is gonna be like a good clip to post, blah blah. Then boom, light falls, and I'm like, oh shit.
So that what just happened there. So I had a job interview a few weeks ago, and all the job interviews are on Zoom now, and so it's going well. And then I went to go get something, and literally knocked my whole. I didn't knock just my camera over that time though. I knocked over the whole monitor. So like literally, I'm like in this interview, I'm picking up the monitor, and so I'm like, oh, I ain't getting this. I actually got the job, but I laughed it off. But I appreciate that. Yeah, but that's technology, man. It fails me all the time.
Dude, I hear that. I'm always learning something new. So let's get into it. Let's talk about your childhood. You grew up in Steel Valley.
Yes.
I've kind of alluded to this a lot in the podcast that like I didn't know what was outside of Beaver County for a lot of my life. So like tell me, what was it like growing up in Steel Valley? What did you guys do?
Very blue collar neighborhood, very integrated, black, white. It's a melting pot, which I loved because I definitely got a lot of character built out of that. Steel Valley was a pretty interesting experience, but so it's a small school. Like my graduating class had like 98, but I was talking about this with Doran Dickerson on our podcast. It's interesting because sports are so pushed that despite the fact that how small we are as a community, like Charlie Batch, NFL, Paris Ford's going to the NFL, Luke Getsy, quarterback, he was a backup quarterback in the NFL, and then now he's coaching in the NFL. Aaron Walker played on the Super Bowl 49ers in the 80s. We've put in, I think, about 8 to 10 NFL players, despite being easily one of the smaller schools in the Whippeals. So it's very blue collar. Like I played football, growing up. Like if you didn't play football, and you were a guy, it's one of those like manhood things. Like, yeah. So you had to earn your stripes for sure. Definitely built a lot of character through that. But honestly, I wouldn't change anything because it made me who I am today, which is to be someone that's not afraid to be who they want to be. So.
Yeah. Now, there's two things that I want to talk about in that. The first one is you said it's a melting pot. I think that's something that I didn't get to experience growing up in Beaver. We're called the cake eaters. Everybody's rich there, and I didn't really get that integration until high school because that's when Beaver merges with Midland because they didn't have a high school. So we would merge with them, and that's when like everybody that came from like a lesser neighborhood, I guess you could say. Like I'm not saying I didn't have it. My family didn't have money. That's what I'm saying. Like you'd have these people that would come from the smaller neighborhoods, and they're actually more close knit, and you would interact with them, and it's like it was like a whole new world was opened up to me, and I just want to know what it was like growing up with different cultures in one area in such a small area.
Yeah, I mean, so like that's what I'm most thankful for. Like I grew up poor. Like I grew up I had a single mom. She was a nurse, and we had 4 kids. So typical, like if you watch the show Shameless, it wasn't as exaggerated as that, but like I can relate to that show a lot because that's how I grew up. And not to get political, but that's why I think people do like. I can understand why people do have like when you talk politics or even just life with people. I can see why it's hard for people to connect because my point of view. I was thrown into the melting pot as a young age, so I saw what took place among different communities and different ethnicities and backgrounds, poor, white, black, all that stuff. Like, so that I'm thankful of that, and it is something that I think people need. Like, I think that's good for people because you start seeing people for who they are based on their actions and not what you see on TV or what your parents tell you and stuff like that. Because if I would have went off of that as opposed to what I grew up with, I probably would have a lot of different outlooks on life.
Yeah, absolutely. And like that's why I'm so thankful I went to like a small liberal arts school for college. That's because I got to meet so many different people. Like we had people coming from other countries to come study at our
Yeah.
college.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm getting to know all these people, and it's like sometimes I look back and I'm like, if I would have stayed like in Pittsburgh or like in like where I was from, I wouldn't have had this whole world open up to me. And it's like it's very very I can't find the exact word, but I'd say, for lack of a better word, it's very interesting that there are those types of neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, because like me growing up in Beaver County, like we're just a bunch of hoopies, like you know what I mean? So it's like you have these different cultures that you're able to grow up around, and I feel like that was taken from me as a child.
Yep, for sure.
But the second thing I want to get into, as someone revs their motorcycle down the street, uh, is you said the manhood with football and playing in high school and all that. I, me and a lot of my friends, we all felt that pressure as well. And I just want to talk about that a little bit because I think that has to do with a little bit of mental health too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you said, if you're a guy and you're athletic and you didn't play football, it's like, what are you doing? Like that's the how everybody looked at you.
Yep.
I was just wanted you to kind of elaborate on your experience with that.
No, definitely. My little brother actually, I have a brother that's 12 years younger than me, and when he was a big kid, and I mean, he was like 6'1", 270. He was a little overweight when he was in high school, and the coaches were literally begging him to play because they were probably like, "Hey, we'll get you in the weight room and you can play offensive, defensive line." Like, we don't have a lot of. Again, we went to a small school, so they don't have a lot of 250-pound plus kids walking around there. And he was like, "No, I want to be in the choir." And I respected the hell out of that so much because my brother was like, I like singing and doing plays and stuff like that. And I was so defensive of him because I know how other people would see that. Now we're in 2021 now. It's a little different than when I was back in high school in 2006. Honestly, I didn't feel any lot of pressure. If anything, it was more the opposite. It was gatekeeping. Like, oh, you want to play football? I remember, like, I know in some of the practices and stuff like that in 10th grade, there was you could definitely feel that, like, they would go after certain people because they either wanted to make you quit, they want to make you quit the team and stuff like that. If anything, there was actually more gatekeeping going on, as opposed to like, yeah, you should play football because that's what all the cool kids do. It was definitely more of the opposite. It was gatekeeping that was going on, at least in my experience.
Gotcha. And then I want to talk about I want to know if you had this experience as well. Being an athlete, you're playing football. Did you feel pressure to play at the next level, to play college football?
No, I wasn't good enough.
Okay. Okay.
My aspirations were to either coach or to talk about sports as a
Yeah.
living. I even in high school, like I said, I built my blog my senior year. I remember I saw Mondesi House and Penn's blog. Those are the two blogs that I'll give the most credit for as far as making blogs cool and wanting to do that. And I was like, wow, like, and MySpace too. Like MySpace, I would always be very opinionated on MySpace. And so I had someone teach me how to do the HTML and build my blog. And so, yeah, no, my goal was, I knew I wasn't good enough. If anything, I was actually better at hockey than football, but I was never going to play at the next level. I always had aspirations to either coach or talk about sports for a living.
Yeah, no, I thought about that because in my experience, it was like if you were half decent, like if you had one good season, whether it was your sophomore year, your senior year, or whatever, if you felt, at least in my experience and my friends' experience, we felt pressure to go play football somewhere. So that's what we did. Like
Mm-hmm.
I bring it up here all the time that I went and played 1 year college football, Division 3, and I didn't even want to do it. Like I called my dad a week into like mini camp or whatever, and I'm like, Dad, get me out of here. Like I don't want to do this. Like I don't want to be here. And like I have friends that had the same experiences, and it's just crazy that being a half decent football player let alone high school athlete in Western Pennsylvania. You have this pressure on you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I want to get into hockey now.
All right.
I'm told you're a huge hockey guy, obviously. I mean, the way you talk about hockey, I'm just like, I could never fathom it, because I got into hockey right around the time Crosby was drafted.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's a funny story, actually. I feel like I'm making this about me. I don't want
No,
to.
you're good, man. I want to hear it.
But it's a funny story. Like, I didn't know about the Penguins until Sidney Crosby. I was young, but like still like, and my dad, I found out later on, my dad was a huge hockey fan growing up. And I'm like, why'd you keep this from me? And I mean, maybe it's because the team was so bad or whatever, like blah, blah. But like, me and him started to bond over hockey, and like,
Yeah.
then it developed. We're more football guys now anyway. We grew up football guys, but we started to bond through that. We'd play the old NHL 2K games and all that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, like, how did you get into hockey? What was your introduction to it?
Honestly, it was just I just happened to like I got into it when I was about 5 or 6, so we're talking 1993. So right after the cup years. I mean, my mom says that I was watching the cup, but I don't remember that.
It's not a memory you have, but
right, yeah, but like no, I remember just watching one night. I got fixated on the logo. I remember I called Yummer Yager Jogger because I didn't know how to. Obviously, I didn't know how to pronounce his name, and I was asking my mom like, "What's I like their pictures on their shirts," and she was like, "You mean their logo?" And I was like, "Yeah," and like I was obsessed with it. I tell people all the time I used to draw all the teams' logos in elementary school. I was obsessed with them, and I was obsessed with the goalies' helmets. And then from that day on, I told my mom I was like, I want to get a hockey stick, and I was playing street hockey, and yeah, like. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not trying to sound like I was in before the cool kids and everything like that. But I remember in 7th grade, Darius Kasparaitis scored that game-winning goal in Game 7 against Buffalo, and I was like going outside and banging on pots and pans and stuff like that. I was so excited, and I went to school the next day, and I was geeked up. Like, we're going to the conference finals, and nobody gave a damn about that, like at all. Like nobody. Like there was like. I remember like 2 other kids. This one kid, Zach, he was really into it, and a few others. And I even had a kid tell me in 7th grade, no one cares about hockey. And I was like, okay, I do. And I used to collect all these cards. And it's funny because when Crosby came around in 2006, all of a sudden, my senior year and after, the kids in high school created this FHL, this hockey league where all the kids now were playing hockey. But honestly, I mean, at first I was like, I liked hockey before everybody else. But as I grew older, I was like, no, I'm glad people like hockey now. So I went from being a gatekeeper to like, no, I want more people to like hockey. So.
I mean, that's the typical response, right? Is like when you're the first guy in, then everybody's like, "Oh, well, I was here before that." Yeah, I feel like that's sometimes, or that's how I used to be with the Pirates.
Yep.
Because I followed the Pirates were my A1 day one, because we would go to the games, like new stadium, everything. Like that was our summer trip to do, and it's like I followed them. Like my favorite players right behind me, Jason Kendall. You had Brian Giles. Like I remember those guys, and it's like I remember the bad days, and like everybody does. But I feel like a lot of people didn't come on until like Kutch came up, like 2011 and on.
Yeah,
and it's like you have, and you have that response of you didn't go through the hard times, you didn't
bandwagon fans.
Yeah, but it's like as the years go on, obviously we had our run, and it's gone back to the old days. But like you said, you kind of just you love to see that people are talking about it. It's no longer like, oh, you weren't here. It's, oh, you're talking about it. Thank God somebody's talking about it.
Yeah, and like I mean, again, it's if anything, it is cool now to go back and be like, man, like what I liked, and I remember sitting in my room. I used to have this thing where I would write down. My mom, like, she was like, "You're crazy." I would literally go to a library, go to a bookstore, and get like these hockey encyclopedias, and I would write down all the Conn Smythe winners and all the stats and stuff like that. And I'd be like, I would test my friends, and my friends can vouch for this. I'd be like, ask me who won the last 25 Conn Smythes, and I'll tell you right now and stuff like that. And it's cool now, like when I was doing that stuff now, and Jesse Marshall, who's a friend of mine, is going to be on our podcast next week. He has similar things where he was doing this stuff before hockey was so popular in Pittsburgh. But it's good because now the thing that he is an expertise at, he has a bigger audience. So
Yeah, there's an
why would he
audience for
complain
him.
about it? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I was never really a stats guy, and I think that's why I was never really like comfortable being like, oh, I want to start a Pittsburgh sports podcast, because it's like, I'm just going to sit here and tell you my opinion. I'm not going to tell you what's factual, you know. But I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but
No,
like listening to you guys do 412 Sports Talk, listening to Around the 412, and like NS9 even with the Pirates, and just like getting that knowledge and seeing people just be able to put their knowledge out there and be noticed is really awesome, considering the circumstances of our local mainstream media.
Well, that was the inspiration behind doing it. So I had done the podcast before. We used to do when I was back in Penn's. I was in Penn's Initiative from 2013 to 2016, and I left due to creative differences, is what I'll call them. And then I had really no urge. I had my son 2 years ago, and I was working a typical 9 to 5. So I was like, you know what, like I'll listen to the podcast and stuff like that. But the last 2 years, I've just been to notice that the local sports talk stations are very repetitive. It's if you listen to 93.7, and again, there are some good people that I respect on that station, so I'm not generalizing everybody, but the job I had before, I would literally listen to the radio while I was working, and I listened one day from the morning show to the mid morning show to the afternoon show, and literally all three shows ran 2 segments with the same guest, the same all the time, and I'm like, and it's the same questions and the same and again, it's all about hot takes, and like, I have no problem. I know they have to get listeners, but I find it very disingenuous when people they create their own buzz by, I'm going to come on the Twitter or come on the radio and say something that even I don't believe, because I know that everybody's going to be like, that's a terrible opinion, because nowadays any reaction is a good reaction. And I was just like, dude, but here's the thing, I didn't want to sit there and complain about it and not do anything about it. So I was like, listen, I'm going to create my own podcast. I reached out to Eddie because I knew that he had all the means to do all this stuff, and he could be the straight man. I'm the color, right? Yeah. Mad Chad. I'm the rub, and he's the straight guy. It's like Dean Martin, and now I'm gonna. One thing, that's a dated reference, but who was the guy that hosted Dean Martin? I can't remember now. But anyways, he's the straight guy, and I play off him, and that's kind of how I envisioned that. But it was like, you can sit there and complain all you want about how bad the local media is. A, B, go do something. So that's what we did. So
yeah, so we'll get back. We'll get into that more. But I want to let's reel it back, and let's get into your roots here with all this stuff. You said you went to CCAC. I assume you're going for journalism.
I originally, yes, okay. But I got my associates as just a general because I was like, I'm gonna go transfer, and I did, and for reasons we can leave off the show, I never truly finished. I got credits and never finished. Yeah. But then I was like, well, I don't need them, because at the time, Bleacher Report, I sent Bleacher Report work, like, here's some articles that I wrote on my blog. And they were like, hey, you're hired. They hired me as a correspondent. So they gave me the credentials and all that stuff. So I was like, who needs school? And honestly, that is something in today's world that is feasible. If you're good at something, you technically, like, nowadays, I was listening to Kevin. I'm a big Kevin Smith fan, for any of you movie guys, right? And, and so I listened to his podcast because he does talk about this stuff, and he was like, nowadays, if you want to do something, there's no excuse, and you don't need to go about it the traditional way. We have all the means. You have a mic, a camera, and a computer, or honestly, just a phone. You can do it. A, are you good at it? B, because it's so easy to do it, There's going to be millions of podcasts. What can you do to separate yourself from the competition? And so, okay, how can I do that? Well, I'm going to bring my personality, which I believe is my strength, and B, I'm going to do it in a way that is different from them. How is that? One thing I like to do, especially with our podcast, is I'm not going to bring someone on and just ask them like, well, what went wrong in the Islanders series? And what do you think we're going to do this summer? Because everybody does that.
Yep.
So what I like to do is when I bring a Jesse Marshall or a Doran Dickerson or a Taylor Haas on, is I like to ask them questions kind of like you do about themselves, about their experiences, about the culture. This week with Taylor Haas, we're going to have her on and people will be like, are you going to talk about the expansion draft? No, we're going to talk about what's going on with all these sexual harassment and abuse allegations in hockey and the culture of hockey, and truly dissect that conversation. That way, if someone listens to my podcast and then they listen to a local radio station, they can go, you know what? These guys get in depth with it and they actually try to dissect it as opposed to just asking robotic questions that anybody could ask.
Yeah, you know what? Since we're here, we're just going to talk about it. I was going to talk more about, like, you said you've started a blog, all that, but I think you've kind of just, from the work you guys have put out and from you yourself have put out, I think everybody knows how like you're credible. Like you're good at what you do and you're able to do it, and you do it.
I don't know how credible we are. I mean, I will say one thing that we did reach out. The reason why we took the deal with DK, so we had our own. We were on Spotify and we did our own independent thing. DK actually reached out to us and said, "Hey, I'm looking for content." He said, "Here's why I'm interested in yours. One, and we talked around the 412 about this. So anyone out there that's like, hey, I'm going to start a podcast, I'll never hate on that. Do your thing. Don't worry if you get one listener or 100 listeners or 1,000 listeners, because here's the most important thing is consistency. And DK liked that about that every week we are going to have a guest and a topic, and we are going to stay on board with that. There's no like, okay, next segment we're going to talk about this, and then our listeners are like, what the hell? That's not even in the, like, what are you, like, because like I see people that start YouTube channels and podcasts, and one week they talk about this, and the next week they talk about something completely different. That's not how you're going to build your audience. The most important thing is that core audience, because some weeks we get thousands of listeners some week. Then some weeks it goes down a little bit. But what we looked at was the people that are listening to like 65% of the show, which is really great for podcasts, and they know that what they're going to get with our shows. There's no guessing, and there's no like, oh, well, this week I don't care because they're going to, like, no, they know what they're going to get with our show, and that's, to me, the most important thing.
That's something I didn't think about, but it's a very good point. Like I used to think my consistency was that I had Pittsburgh-based people, like Western Pennsylvania people.
That's a start, yeah, for sure.
But now like it's like, I've been struggling with this thing of, oh, am I too niche? Like, is my podcast too niche? Because it's only Western Pennsylvania people in sports, and it's like you don't like this is like workshopping now. Like, right. So it's like, is my podcast, because I'm not talking to players that used to play for our teams, like bringing them back to the Burgh, and I'm talking to individuals who made a name for themselves from our area, is that way too niche, or should I expand it? That's the question.
I don't think so. I think, again, you're already ahead of the curve. You've built an identity. Your show has an identity. Now you can build upon that foundation. There's certainly ways you can look into how can we expand this now, and that's something that we're going to have to deal with as well. I think last week we exploded with DK because obviously he has a giant audience. And
it's a new show on a new platform. And
this week,
platform.
I will say this week, it's funny because this week's show with Doran Dickerson had less total listeners. Still had a good amount. DK was happy with it, but it had a actual better positive feedback. We actually got a few people that were like, "Hey, I really enjoyed this show. I can't wait to listen next week." And last week, because again, everybody's not gonna like us. I'm very abrasive and opinionated. And so there's going to be people that don't like us, but again, I think what we understand is we know what we're going to bring each week, and if we can build that consistent every Friday, here's our show. We're going to have this guest on and talk about this, and it's going to be related to either the Penguins or the Steelers. Sometimes the Pirates. I got to be honest, not all the time. And I think that really strikes a chord with people. I got people now saying, "Hey, can you guys do another show a week?" And we're like, I think that's going to actually take away from what brings our show. I'd rather have people
sometimes
waiting.
It's like
too much.
Yeah.
I'd rather have people waiting. Hey, I can't wait till next Friday. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So, yep.
But yeah, so we have thrown, like, just breaking the fourth wall a little bit. We have thrown the like layout of this podcast out the window. But I want to you bring up, your abrasiveness. You're out there. And you told me you listened to Eddie's episode on here, and I didn't want to say the person's name that you remind me of, but you're a more positive Mark Madden. And I feel bad saying that to your face, but it's true.
so truth be told, I used to be a huge fan of Mark Madden when I was.
I think a lot of people were. I used to listen to Mark Madden all the time.
And Stan Savern's the GOAT, honestly, and I begged him to be on our podcast. And to his credit, he's older, and it's like, is that worth my time? I get it, but so like when I was in middle school and high school, I mean, when I came home from school, if I stayed home and didn't go out, like I was listening to ESPN radio at the time, Mark Madden. And what I found later on is that I know he calls it a character. So for one thing, I don't play a character. I am the same person I am on Twitter outside. When you meet me, if you meet me at a Penguins game or a Pirates game, I don't play a character. Sometimes I get a little too heated. But one thing I've stopped doing is, I will never, like, if you have a bad opinion about the Penguins, I might say, yeah, that opinion sucks, right? That's as far as I'm going to take it, though. I'm not going to be like, yo, your son looks ugly, or your wife is ugly, or this or that, because why, like, I had to look in the mirror myself. I've not lived a perfect life, so I can't throw stones living in a glass house. B, if the worst thing about a person is they have terrible takes about sports, that's not harming anybody.
Yeah.
It's not harming anybody. It might be dumb, and we can sit there, and I get traction out of it because I can look for a bad, hey, the Penguins should trade Malkin and Letang for prospects. Look at this dumbass tweet. And then, like, people laugh. But, like, there's a difference between that versus, like, you should drive your car into oncoming traffic because of this tweet. And I started to really, like, see, like, oh, now that I'm older and I'm a father, like, that really isn't okay, because what if that person really would do that? Because you have 100,000 followers on Twitter, and I've interacted with this person we're talking about, and then he sends thousands of people that literally will dig up dirt about you and say stuff about your son and stuff like that. And I was like, that's not who I want to be or what I want to be about. So yes, I do think it's okay to mock opinions, because it is what it is. We're on a public forum, and if you're going to say something, and listen, I've had bad takes, and sometimes you'll see me retweet my bad take, like, this really aged well, and that's all in good fun. But when you're like, hey, yeah, your wife's ugly, and it's like, for one thing, you would never say that to me in person anyways.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's like, you just gotta live on social media or life in general by the golden rule, and that's don't be a jerk, And it's like, I give my opinion on Mark Madden a lot, or at least I used to, and I used to say things like you were saying, like those horrible things, because he's a celebrity in, like, the smallest sense, just because he's local.
He's a big fish in a small pond.
Exactly. And it's like, I used to say those things. I had to step back and be like, I'm saying these things about him. I'm not the greatest shape. I'm not, like, the greatest looking guy. Like, why am I going after him for that? So now everything I say about him on social media is based solely off of his work.
Yes.
And it's like, that's the best way to go about it. And then I'll have people come into my comments on that tweet and then say those horrible things. And then I'll call them out. I'll be like, I don't support that. Like, don't say that.
Yeah.
Like, that's not right. And it's like, for some people, it just doesn't do it for them. It's like, oh, you're a pussy because you don't agree that he's a fat ass. And it's like, why would I call him a fat ass when I'm overweight too?
What? Yeah, and we talk about the work. So again, this is why I support independent people. I mean, there are a few professionals in this town. Bob Pompiani, I sing his praise all the time. That's someone that you should look up to if you're looking to get in the media. He does everything the right way. He's genuine. He doesn't have to throw out these character things. Look, he has 90,000 followers on Twitter. Everybody knows who Bob Pompiani is in Pittsburgh, and he didn't have to be a jerk about it. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. Isn't that crazy how you can become successful and still be a good person? And that's the thing is, like, for one thing, saying that you're a character is a cop out. Here's the thing: perception is reality. If the only perception of you is that I have is interacting with you on social media, that doesn't matter, because what I say on here is real. Even if you delete it. So if you tell me, oh, one day your son's gonna go get kidnapped or leave you or go, he said something like, if one day your son's gonna go missing or something like that, and he deleted his tweet, like, it doesn't matter. Oh, what, that was your character? That's a total cop out, and I don't buy that. For one thing, you're supposed to be a professional sports media journalist or analyst or whatever. So even if that's your character, that kills your credibility to me, anyways. Because this isn't wrestling. This isn't WWE.
And that's the thing, is that's where he finds that. And I think it's how he's been so successful, and I give him credit for it. It worked because he was a guy that came from WCW. He came from the wrestling, like, he brought the wrestling persona to sports media. And I'll say, dude, you're the best person that's done that, except now Pat McAfee might be better than him. But
also to that point, if he tried to do that today, if he started today, it wouldn't work. B, there are people, and they work for the fan, who obviously try to use some of that. There's one that is a co-host in the morning show, and then there's a guy in the afternoon who thinks drinking IPAs is a personality trait, and you can see that them being a jerk is like their calling card of and it's like that's not
going to make me want to read your take, right, or listen to you.
And then it's even worse when they have a bad sports take and then they're a jerk about it. Like, good Lord. And again, it's like, but there's like Taylor Haas from DK, or there's Jesse Marshall from The Athletic, who don't need to go to those lows, and they just let their work speak for them. And that's way more impressive nowadays to me than being a character. Like, I'm over the Skip Baylesses of the world and stuff like that. I want good content.
And that's the thing, is I forget where I was listening to that, but they were making that point that it's like, these guys made their careers doing that, like Skip Bayless, Stephen A., Max Kellerman even. And it's like, why do you think nobody watches ESPN anymore? It's too long and played out. We've heard every take out there.
Yeah, not to mention that, again, I've once you see past the fourth wall, right? Like, there was a thing that came out in Deadspin, and I'm not even a big Deadspin fan, but that said, like, First Take, they literally will sit there, like, Skip Bayless doesn't believe the stuff that he says. He knows that it's gonna get traction, and again, I know for a fact that Madden, Dunlap, and Chris Muller, they do things like Chris Muller. His whole character is that he's anti-Pittsburgh, right? He's gonna root for the Browns. So once you see that is what it is, then you start to go, well, this is all disingenuous. It's just, you're not really reporting or analyzing anything. You're just trying to make me angry and react. Because if I click on it and put, this article is dumb as hell, blah, 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 it doesn't matter. Because he got me to click on it, and now me commenting on it and clicking on it is going to push it in the algorithm. And that's all they're looking for. We could do that too. This week, me and Eddie could go, Mad Chad and Eddie show. This week, we are going to say why the Penguins should trade Evgeny Malkin. And I could sit there for 48 minutes and pretend that I want the Penguins to trade Evgeny Malkin, and we're going to get 5,000 listeners. But it's going to kill my credibility. So is my credibility being killed worth an extra 3,000 followers, or should I just go and truly have a show that I truly believe in, but keep my dignity?
Yeah. So no, I think that brings up a good question, and that's, How do you get the average Pittsburgh sports fan to what's the word? To go from listening to the fan every day to listening to 412 Sports Talk or Around the 412 or NS9 or even back to the Burgh? How do you get that audience to realize there's better Pittsburgh sports content out there?
It's hard. So one thing is, as anybody that has a podcast or a YouTube channel or a blog, you'll realize that you're not going to get everyone. One person is going to be a victory, because when I jump in my car, right, and go to the gym after this, it's very easy for me to turn on 93.7 The Fan, as opposed to, okay, I got to go here, I got to go to the podcast store,
Yeah.
and do so listen, and who listens to radio the most? Older people. That's when we debuted last week. There was like this guy Gary commented, gave great feedback. We were very complimentary. He said, "Listen, this show isn't for me," right? And right away you're like, "Gary, what do you mean? This show's great." But he goes, "But," he said, "but I have a feeling the younger audience is going to connect with it very well. So I think it's a good pickup for DK." So he literally said he wasn't going to listen to our show, but then gave us a compliment in the next sentence. Word of mouth is the easiest way, and that's why I promote your show, Around the 412, and a couple other places, because I lost my other account that had almost 6,000 followers on it.
That's unfortunate.
I'm sure I'll build it up again at some point, but I do have a decent following. So if I retweet and stuff like that, that's one thing to do. B, if you see people on Twitter going, "Hey, I'm so sick of the fan," well, you should check out this. That's going to be the ultimate way to do it. And then also, it's just content. If you make good, interesting content, someone out there will find it. They will tell someone else. That's how Jesse Marshall is the biggest example. I know I'm kissing his ass a lot, but he had a blog. It was just a blog, Face Off Factor. He made it himself. He didn't have any sponsors or advertisers, but people kept posting it on all the forums, because they were like, "Yo, this dude really knows hockey, and he's making a lot of great points. Let's go." Pens.com was where like all this stuff kind of formulated from. And just him being himself and making great content led him to being someone that works for The Athletic now. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So if you make good content, if you're consistent, it will happen.
Yep, for sure. And hey, we got to give a shout out to Gary.
Yes.
Thank you, Gary, for the feedback on the fantastic show. He's right. It's got the younger audience's attention, and we like it. So let's talk about it. You guys have had DK on your show before. How did this, deal happen? How do you guys go from being this independent podcast to, hey, this guy that is almost just like us, who took a chance on himself, now he wants our content as well? How does that happen?
Well, for one thing, Dejan gets a lot of hate, and listen, I've had spats with DK over opinions and stuff like that. But again, that's different than personally attacking one another. It's just like, hey, I think you're wrong in this thing. That's great. So Eddie and I, this is also going to bring up another thing. If you want, I see people every day like, "I'm going to do a podcast," and then I see people like, "Oh, there's too many." Listen, who cares? If someone makes a podcast, it doesn't hurt anybody. Don't go into this thinking, "Oh, well, I'm going to make tons of money," because DK will be the first to tell you. His site gets thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of listens on their podcast. The ad revenue is still going to be marginal at best. You're not going to quit your 9 to 5 by just having a successful podcast. You might get some money, $25, $50, $100 a month, and that's great. Especially if you have another job, it's extra money, and you're literally making money talking about sports, which is a dream. But you can't go into it thinking, "I'm going to have Juju Smith-Schuster on my podcast," because these guys get requests every single day, and they're not going to do all of our shows.
Yep.
So the most important thing, Eddie and I, was like, "Listen, we're just going to make a show, and it's going to be a Pittsburgh sports talk show." What do we mean by that? We are going to literally bring up save percentage and all the stats and dive deep into the stuff, as opposed to like having these hot takes like, "Call in today if you think the Penguins should trade Malkin," because we have enough of that. We want to talk about why the Penguins' third line or fourth line is the best defensive line in hockey, and go from there and have a conversation about it, and then also have a very intimate conversation with our guests. Okay, so how did DK pick up this? Obviously, we had him on the show twice, actually.
Yes.
And I think, so we had him on the show before we were even picking up traction. We started last August, and we were doing a show every single week, which again is key. Every single week around the same day, you have to do that or else you're going to start losing your consistency. And then he saw our progression. We didn't even do video in the beginning. We didn't have as good as equipment in the beginning. And we went from that to like having like 4K cameras and all these mics. And then we had him on the show again. What really put us over the top is we had Jared Kruger from his website on when the RMU story broke.
Yeah.
And that was one of our biggest podcasts. We had like 2,000 plus downloads for that podcast, plus a couple hundred views on YouTube. It was even our show was even voted up on Reddit because that RMU story was huge.
Yeah.
He said, I gotta be honest, that RMU episode was very good. When are you bringing our show to our website? And I said, I don't know, man. Me and Eddie are kind of having, we're looking for sponsors and stuff like that. And then we had Taylor Haas on the following week, and that show got a good response. And then he was like, listen, here's what's going to happen. We want to have your show on. We'll split, whatever ad revenue 50-50 for you guys. Plus you guys can get your own sponsors, which you can keep 100% of. And that's a great deal because normally they already have advertisers. So if you get another sponsor on top of that, that other advertiser is going to be like, hey, you can't have this person sponsoring the show. We're still, but they're saying it's cool. That's great for us because we can really make twice the money now. But B, it's going to give our show credibility. Now we can literally say, hey, our show's on DK Pittsburgh Sports. It's not, this random ass podcast on YouTube. But it also works for him because he has a consistent show every Friday that's going to have a core audience. So it's what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Where do we go from here? I don't know. People today were like, hey, we guys should do more shows per week. We got to look into that. I don't know. But I looked at it as we're going to get a bigger audience and more credibility. And for DK, he has a consistently professional podcast every Friday that is geared towards a younger audience.
Yeah, and I think that's perfect for his brand because, I like you said, like not everybody agrees with DK and he gets heat. And
no,
it's like,
people don't like him sometimes.
I don't agree with him a lot, but I like the content that him and his crew put out, like the stuff that Chris Carter puts out on the Steelers. And
Taylor Haas to me is
Haas is great.
She's great, yeah.
Like everything that his people put out there, it's like it's hard not to be in tune with. There's an ambulance going by.
I hear it,
yeah. So and now my headphones are unplugged. Now I'm back. But no, it's like it's hard not to be in tune with their stuff, especially as a younger viewer of sports media, because they're relating to everybody. And when I talked to Chris Carter, we joked around about DK and like how he doesn't really get the memes, he doesn't get the gifs, like he's still that straightforward guy. He doesn't get all the jokes, but he's surrounding himself with the people like you, like Carter, like Taylor Haas, that are appealing to the younger audience that are tired of listening to what their parents used to listen to on the radio. So he's really building this brand, and it's really awesome to see.
And not to give away too many of the secrets, but I mean, so there's already talks about me hosting a Pens post-game show next season. His goal, as far as audio media goes, is to have 24/7 audio media that would compete with the local radio stations. I think that's very ambitious of him, but I think it's smart because we were talking about around the 412 guys about this, about how if I had the means, the financial means, what I would do is I would buy up all these podcasts, and I would just have a server host site where you could get all the Pittsburgh sports sites to take away from Spotify and iTunes.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine how many list downloads that thing would have. So DK is getting ahead of the curve with that. Right now, we're still going to stick with the one show a week because really the only other way to do it would be for me and Eddie to do a show every single day. and that would really water us down, and I would run out of stuff to say. I don't even tweet as much right now during the summer because what the hell am I going to talk about other than like every once in a while we get some
Dude,
some
I'm in
stuff.
the same boat because
Yeah.
I'm all football. Like football is my thing.
Yeah.
And it's like there's barely anything to talk
The
about. Like,
DeCastro stuff was a blessing. Well, not a blessing because it sucks for the Steelers, but it was a blessing for content creators because it gave us something to talk about. Yeah.
Even today, even though this is going to come out in a couple weeks, but
Dodson
today,
stuff.
yeah, the Dodson stuff, he's not in shape. He's too fat, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, no. Like,
but even then, when that's your biggest news story, like
it sucks.
Same thing with the Penguins. How many times can I talk about who the Penguins should keep in the expansion draft? Exactly. I can't do it every single episode.
And that's the thing. I see it every day.
Yeah.
And it's like it's not you. It's like other people talking about it every day.
But again, that's why our podcast isn't just about that. It's gonna be about other conversations. Like with Dorn, we went in and we were talking about like the history of whip mules, and I asked him like what is it in our water that gives us so many great players? Because if you look at Western Pennsylvania, it is very small compared to even Ohio or Texas or Florida or California, yet we produce just as many NFL players as them. Yep. So, like, I thought that was a great thing because I could have sat there and said, what do you think about the Steelers' offensive line this year? Well, dude, you know how many times we're going to talk about that from now until August? Yeah. So, like, this week, we're having Taylor Haas on, right? We probably aren't even going to bring up the entry draft. I want to talk about what the hell is going on with hockey culture that we're getting all these teams that are involved in sexual abuse allegations. And also, she's a woman that covers Pittsburgh sports. She interacts in these locker rooms. Yep. I want to talk to her about those experiences and what it's like to be a female in this profession. To me, that is way more interesting than what do you think about the Penguins expansion draft every week?
Yeah, no, that's every time I have a woman in sports on my podcast, I always make it a point to bring that up and be like, what was your experience? You know, because there needs to be awareness and like, it's an interesting conversation to have because us as white males, we don't face that.
To that point, so I actually had Jesse Marshall scheduled to be on the show this week, and that's what we're going to talk about is the playoffs and all that stuff. And I was like, hey man, I'm canceling you this week. And he was like, well, is everything? He thought something was wrong. So is everything good? And I was like, nah, man. I was like, next week we'll be closer to free agency and all that stuff. So
we'll have more to talk about, yeah.
B, I was like, I was going to bring up the sexual assault allegation stuff going on in the NHL. And I was like, I think it would be better to have a woman's perspective on that than three white dudes sitting around talking about it.
Yeah. and like sometimes it's an uncomfortable conversation.
Dude, for sure.
Like, even at the beginning of this podcast, whenever I was talking about different cultures in Pittsburgh, that's an uncomfortable conversation for me. Yeah. But like, I'm not out here like judging people. I'm out here trying to learn, you know, like we're getting so philosophical on this podcast. Like I watch, or I used to watch, his name's Emmanuel Acho, his Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. He has it's a YouTube like show that he does, and I would watch it all the time, and I'm like, I'm learning so much about like people, and I feel like a lot of people don't take the time to do that,
or they don't want to.
Exactly. It's horrible. Like it's so interesting to learn about just people and culture.
No, for sure, and I was stuck, dude. I mean, I've progressed as a person. Like, again, if I still had my old Twitter account, there's tweets from 2012, 2013, 2014 that I probably would be canceled for nowadays. And instead of being like, well, like, no, like I progressed as a person, and like I learned, I learned things. That's why I think certain people in this country don't want people to learn things, because when you learn and you have more knowledge, you're less ignorant about certain subjects. Then you start having like empathy and insight on what the actual things going on are, and not just politics, on just life in general. So now when I go out, like I don't just immediately judge everybody because A, don't throw stones in the glass house, but B, I'm like, you know what? This is they're probably going through something that I don't know about. So
exactly. So we've gone all over the place in this podcast, but before we head out, I do want to ask you about your son. And I see you
Yes,
guys on Snapchat all the time. I'm glad
yes,
you're probably one of the best ads that I have on Snapchat because it's just you and your son going to Kennywood every weekend.
yes. We have a pass. Yeah. Well, so he got hurt on a trampoline, so we
Yeah.
usually do the water parks and stuff like that. But he obviously can't get his leg wet right now.
Yeah, but so how did he like him coming into this earth? How did that change your life?
It changed. I mean, everyone that is close to me will tell you that. Again, like that's why I changed my name from Mad Chad to Dad Chad. I'm not the person that I used to be, and not to get all like wimpy on everybody or like soft, but like if you believe things happen for a reason, there's probably that he was made to happen for me
Yeah.
because I didn't always lead a great life. I drank a lot, I partied a lot, I did stuff that I'm not proud of, and now like I live what I call a very boring life. Going to Kennywood with my son is literally like the most excitement I get out of the week. I work, I do my podcast, I play video games and watch movies, and I hang out with my son. He's priority number one because how I feel is because I partied all of that time and did all that stuff.
Yeah.
I already have all the experiences in life that I need. Now I'm trying to focus on him. So if he's having fun and doing that stuff, I get to like live vicariously through him because him having fun. It's all about him now. I've already done everything that I wanted to do, and I lived a full life in my 20s. I'm in my 30s now. I'm a dad, so that's where my focus is. So for people that do want the edgy Mad Chad, they kind of missed it because I'm not like I'm a father now, and that's kind of where it is.
And that's awesome. I mean, he's such a cool kid.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
great. Yeah, he has a
I like,
personality. It's crazy.
and that's what I like. I've only seen like I think I've only had you on Snapchat for probably a couple weeks now, but like seeing him on there and like having so much fun at Kennywood, it's like wow. I wish I was
Yeah.
there with him. I wish I was his age again.
No, and I didn't have my father. I never knew my biological father growing up. I mentioned I'm a single father, so like I'm not kidding when I say like I'm going to be the dad that I always wanted. So yes, I'm an authority figure, and I make sure that I have to.
Absolutely.
I can't cross the line of being a friend, but I also resent that because if when I was a kid, man, I would have done anything to have my dad go to Dave and Buster's with me or go to Kennywood with me and be someone that I can confide in, and that's what I plan on being for him. So,
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm lucky enough to have a very good relationship with my father.
mm,
And, you know, like you kind of said it there, like you don't want to cross that line of being a friend, you want to be an authority figure.
yeah,
As time goes on, I feel like you will become probably his best friend because that's what's
exactly.
happening.
Especially when he's a grown adult, like that's
Exactly.
what I want to be, is best friends with him. So,
Yeah, exactly. And that's my dad, he always says, "Oh, I have regrets. I should have done this for you. I should have done that." And it's like, Dad, you did everything right. Like,
yes,
I'm not like in the streets right now. Like you did something right for me not to be laying in
exactly.
the streets right now. So we'll end with that note with fatherhood and love.
Yes.
Who cares if you get lovey dovey these days and sappy? Who cares? We love it over here. Well, Chad, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I know we didn't really talk about you, but we talked a lot about your passion, and I think that made this a really good episode.
Yeah, for sure. And again, that was something that DK mentioned with us. I don't know if anyone's ever listened to like certain people on the radio. I'll give you an example. If we're throwing names out there, Paul Zeiss. If you're listening to this show, it sounds like he's literally being forced at gunpoint to host a radio show. Like literally, like it sounds like he's having a terrible day. I want to call in and be like, "Is there
Are
something
you
that you want
okay?
to talk about?" And that's what I think. People are like, "Oh, well, you guys are just fans talking about sports." That's what I want. I
Like,
want
yeah.
someone that sounds like they generally are interested in this subject. And again, Jesse Marshall was another example of when he talks about hockey, you can tell that he loves hockey. And he's not just doing it to be smarter than you. He's trying to tell you, listen, I love this thing and I'm gonna tell you why. And that is something that inspired me. I like talking about Pittsburgh sports, and we've gone through so much political turmoil and kind of still are in this world that like for 48 minutes a week, I wanted a show where someone could tune in and listen to actual sports content without being like the world sucks. Like, so that's what inspired me.
That's awesome, man. Well, thank you for coming on. And if you would just tell everybody where they can find you on social media and your show and everything.
Yeah, Mad Chad 412 on Twitter. So then DK Pittsburgh Sports /podcasts is where you can find the Mad Chad and Eddie show. It debuts, not debuts, but it airs every Friday at 9 a.m. And that's when it will drop every single week. And then you can always find the extended versions at 412 Sports Talk on YouTube. And I'm also hosting 2 live streams a month on that YouTube channel as well. If you subscribe, I give away T-shirts and stuff like that sometimes, and then we just talk like on like raw live stream where I interact with people. So yep, that's where you can find me.
All right, awesome. Everybody go check out Mad Chad Nolan. He's the man, and I hope we all get accustomed to seeing him in his face and getting his takes, because he's a breath of fresh air in Pittsburgh sports media.
Appreciate it.